Episode 2, March 13th, 1997. Lights of varying descriptions were seen by hundreds of people in the skies over the US states of Arizona and Nevada and the Mexican state of Sonora. There were two distinct events between 1930 hours and 2230 hours in a space of about 300 miles, that's 480 kilometers, from the Nevada line through Phoenix to the edge of Tucson, Arizona. A triangular formation of lights was seen to pass over the states, and a series of stationary lights seen in the Phoenix area. The lights were reported to have reappeared in 2007 and again in 2008.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a skeptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
So hello listeners, welcome back. I'm Stu.
And I'm Neil.
And we're going to be talking today about the Phoenix Lights incident, which is, well, incidents. There were actually 3 occasions of this, which was quite interesting. So the first one we know was March the 13th, 1997. And that was a big event, but it was actually duplicated again, or repeated, if you like, in 2007 in February, and again in 2008. Now, I think the first one we should talk about, just to get it out of the way, is the 2008 occurrence, because this one was very quickly 2007 was very quickly decried. But 2008 was instantly, somebody came forward and said, oh yeah, my neighbour's been letting off helium-filled balloons and that's what it is, and
with road flares attached,
and admitted it. It was corroborated by a police helicopter that they'd seen these helium balloons with LED. So,
with flares.
Even though I'm the one arguing, yeah, it's all real, I'm going to say the 2008, no. I don't think for one moment. Neil, is there anything you want to say about 2008 that contradicts what I'm suggesting?
No, there doesn't seem to be much to it apart from the guy with the helium balloons with flares attached, who was maybe trying to recreate the event, yeah. So I mean, the other 2 events kind of get mangled up between the 1997 and the 2007 event.
They can do a little bit, but yeah, I mean, and this is one of the problems that ufologists and people who study these things have, is you do get basically pillocks going out and creating these fake events, and that can muddy the waters. I mean, we mentioned a little bit in last episode about Doug and Dave, who claimed to have done all the crop circles, which was laughable in of itself. But of course, again, the media just fixates, oh, see, that one has a natural explanation, so therefore they all must have. which I don't know. I don't buy into. So I think people who do these things do far more harm than good.
And we do have a lazy news media who are chasing ratings, and they just want a story, and whatever looks good on the front page, they will skirt around any details that kind of disarm the story. So
well, that's an interesting perspective. So two things: that one, they want a good story. Now, instantly, I would say, if these things are genuinely otherworldly, let's say, then that, I would say, is the biggest story of all.
Yes. So
it kind of to look for an excuse flies in the face of that, I would say. But you also say, and quite rightly so, they can be quite lazy about it.
Yeah.
And investigative journalism, well, I don't know if it's laziness or the fact that any serious investigation done by journalists tends to get ridiculed quite quickly.
Yeah, but also, I mean, making big headlines out of hoaxers doesn't necessarily stop them making big headlines out of the events. They can say, look, UFOs have been seen, big story, and then a few nights later, someone's come forward and claimed that they faked it and this is how they did it, big story. And then a year or so later, someone says, oh, well, no, we've proved that they didn't do it, big story again. So it's back to real. So it just keeps this thing rolling. It is, it isn't, it is, it isn't.
That's true. It sells more papers, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a valid excuse. But I also wonder if there's so one of my favourite authors, Terry Pratchett, and he put a thing in one of his books where he said that what people look for is not news. They don't want to know something new. They want to know that the world is exactly like they thought it was.
Absolutely. They want affirmation. They want affirmation.
Don't want news.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a newspaper or journalist saying the world is not what you thought it was would go down like a bombshell.
So yeah, I mean, people want affirmation, but it is just the nature by which we process information. If someone tells you something which sounds very believable because it kind of fits in with all sorts of things you already know, then you're far more likely to believe it than if someone tells you something extraordinary or something you don't want to hear or something that proves you wrong about something else, something you've previously said or done. Shows you,
absolutely.
And people will, they will actually not process that information at all. They will just not. It will be as if you've never told them. They won't have heard it.
Yes, that's very, very, very true. And of course, there's this whole thing, seeing is believing, and if you say that things happen, but there's no hard evidence, it's like, well, but they're probably making it up.
Yeah.
Which again, in ufology terms, that's one of the biggest arguments is, well, there's supposed to be all these UFOs. There's supposed to be all this. How come nobody, captures decent footage of them? How come, especially we've all got these days the camera phones and that, how come nobody ever captures it? Well, that segues really nicely into tonight's, where they did. In fact, particularly in the 2007 occurrence in Phoenix.
Well, according to my reference,
lights.
Yeah, and with the first event in 1997, of course, I suppose everyone was called the Prescott-Dewey lights because that was the trajectory of the lights. The television KSAZ reported that someone named Richard Curtis had recorded a detailed video that purportedly showed the outline of a spacecraft, but that the video had been lost.
Yes, then they lost it, which is either very unfortunate or was the government involved?
Yes, and then of course they have got another video which is of poor quality and just shows a group of lights, but you can't see any visible craft joining those lights together.
Indeed. No, I mean, there's a lot more footage 10 years later in 2007. I would say none of it is brilliant footage. But yeah, coming back to the 1997, now that was an interesting one because you've got essentially two. I see them in my head as two separate occurrences that may be linked. You've got the sighting of the 5 lights first of all, around 7 o'clock local time, and then 3 hours later, although those lights are seen on and off sporadically throughout that region, then 3 hours later you've got these 9 lights suddenly, and of course there's 700 witnesses of that. 700 people came forward and said, I've seen this, and it's bizarre and it's strange, and this is, people independently of each other reported seeing some sort of V-shape or arrowhead shaped vehicle.
And of course the news media further obfuscated the whole thing, because as I say, there were these 2 separate events, the 5 lights travelling in a V formation, which some people said they could actually see the outline of a V-shaped craft that was about a mile wide. And then a few hours later there was this string of falling lights. Well, of course the news media being lazy, they would be describing one whilst showing footage of the other. So a lot of people who'd seen it for real would look at it on television and say, no, that's not what I saw. I saw something else. Yeah. So it further, muddied the waters around the story.
But is that deliberate? To discredit those who did come forward?
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, I think the tendency, again, with tabloid newspapers or tabloid television, they want to get these people on to laugh at them.
Oh, absolutely.
They are the, in early 20th century terms, they would have been the travelling freak show. Step right up and see the nutter.
Oh yeah, and they would go out of their way to find the, and I'll be fairly generous in saying this, the quirkiest people they can find.
Yeah.
But out of those 700 witnesses, you've got some incredibly credible witnesses. And one in particular kind of always makes me like... So, you've got a bizarre chain of events that happened afterwards, where it was a few days after the governor of Phoenix, Fife Symington III, which is a great name. He holds a press conference and says, we've found the culprit who's behind all this, and they wheel out this guy in a massive alien costume, and of course he takes the mask off and what have you, and it's all isn't it a big joke? So he's part of this. Look at this, isn't it all a big joke? But 10 years later, I mean, interestingly enough, not about a month after the lights are seen again, he actually comes forward and says, well, actually back in 97 I did see it myself. I can tell you it was some otherworldly type craft, and this is a guy who's an ex-Air Force pilot, and he knows what aircraft's supposed to look like and what they can do, and he's saying, I've no idea what I saw, and it was it was incomprehensible.
I mean, I know,
and you can't get much more credible than that, surely.
No, I mean, one of the I think it was the trail, the second set of lights, which a US Air Force spokesperson said they were flares being dropped from an A-10 Warthog aircraft. Just the kind of flares that military aircraft drop to deflect heat-seeking missiles. But you would have thought people living in that region near an airbase, the Barry Goldwater Air Base, would be used to that kind of thing. They would be used to seeing things in the sky. There was, with the first set of lights, the V formation, there was a chap called Mitch Stanley, who had a 10-inch Dobsonian telescope, which gave him a 60 times magnification, and he looked up at the V as it flew over and saw that it was a formation of aeroplanes, and that each light was actually 2 lights really, but because they were so far away, all you were seeing was one glow. But of course, people looking up into the sky at night, they can't really judge how far away things are. So there are all sorts of contradictory accounts as to how far this. So something travelling very fast at high altitude could be mistaken for something travelling slowly at low altitude because of its apparent.
Okay, but I'm familiar with Mitch's statements on this, but the Air Force Base themselves reported very publicly that there were no aircraft flying at that time in that vicinity. They made that absolutely clear. In addition to that, nothing appeared on radar.
Yeah, that is accounted for. There was nothing. Well, they say there was nothing spotted on radar, but according to this account here, which I can't actually find at the moment, but essentially, the people who run the radar said, well, no one asked for the radar, because it's recorded. They said, well, no one asked for it, and they delete it after 11 days or something. So they said, well, yeah, there is no radar record of it because no one asked.
Okay, I'm going to call shenanigans on that, because you've got 700 witnesses coming forward reporting things, and they would have reported them to the airbase. Some of them reported them to their local UFO groups. Some of them reported them to the papers. The papers would have rung the airbase, no doubt.
Yeah,
but they didn't think to check the radar reports.
Yeah, it says none of the UFO investigators bothered to ask for tapes from the FAA in Albuquerque, whose officials at the time told this guy, Tony Ortega, they only kept tapes for 11 days. So we'll never know what the radar picture looked like that night.
Never mind the journalists. What I'm saying is the Air Force themselves, on hearing this, didn't bother to check their radar records. That's what I'm struggling to buy into. Maybe
they did, and maybe they just dismissed it. They said, "Oh yeah, that's we didn't tell the public about that." I mean, I'm sure there are all sorts of things the Air Force do that they don't necessarily want to tell the public about.
Absolutely. And I find that far more easy to believe than just nobody bothered checking. I'm damn certain somebody somewhere will have checked the radar.
Oh
but
yeah,
the fact that it's not been.
The Air Force, yeah. The Air Force would have done, but apparently the FAA in Albuquerque said no one asked us for it.
Yeah, okay. we'll hold that one to one side. But then you've got, so the Air Force have said there were no planes flying. Then later on they say, oh yeah, we dropped flares from a plane. What, that wasn't flying?
Yeah.
So they've contradicted themselves straight away.
Unless their account is garbled. I mean, it's quite possible, if you've got high-flying planes, that they weren't from a local base.
Okay.
They were travelling. So it could be, because they will, no, we didn't launch any planes from our base at that time. Later on, we put one up.
Okay.
And that's the one that dropped the flares, but...
That's a good theory, and I'm gonna call on your experience as a military information expert here. If you've got, let's say more local to us. Let's say you've got the RAF in Oxfordshire are going to do a flyby across the city of London. Are you saying that nobody is going to tell the people watching the skies in London, the RAF covering London, that they're going to be doing that?
Yes, they would. But if as the planes flew over, your nearest RAF base was, I don't know, what's another RAF base? So say they were flying southwest, and you saw them near Brize Norton. So you got in touch with RAF Brize Norton and said, "Are those planes yours?" And they'd say, "Well, no, we haven't put any planes up tonight."
Okay, but Brize Norton would know of other planes going through their airspace.
Yeah, which would be military and civilian. They'd know that, but they would probably answer the specific question. No, we haven't got any planes up tonight.
Ah, well, that's the key thing there. The Phoenix Air Force were asked, "Are there any planes that you're aware of?" Not have you got planes up, but are there any planes that you're aware of?
Okay.
Which is a more specific. And they said no, there are no planes flying in the area tonight.
But then later on, when the flares were seen, they said, "Oh yeah, that's one of ours."
Yeah,
one of these
planes
that isn't flying that dropped those flares.
Exactly. Now again, as a what was your intelligence?
Army intelligence, yeah.
Army intelligence. So I know it's Army, not Air Force, but you must be at least have a reasonable knowledge of flares. Seen flares.
We worked joint services, so it was Army, Air Force, and Navy all working together, and we would all cover all kinds of in what we were monitoring. We wouldn't just monitor those three main services. We would also be monitoring border guards, police, paramilitary groups, guerrilla groups. We were looking at the Middle East, so. You couldn't restrict yourself to one service arm.
That's fair enough.
So yes, we did deal with aircraft.
Okay, so I know these lights moved in the general wind direction of that was happening at the time. But in your experience, is it reasonable that flares dropped from an aeroplane would A, last in excess of 3 hours, and B, fly in formation for over 300 miles?
No. I mean, you're talking about the V shape.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be attributed to flares, and that's what seems to have caused the confusion, because they were talking about these things that look like flares. And people who were watching that, who'd seen the V-shaped thing flying over, were saying, "Well, no, that's not what I saw. That looks like flares." Yeah. So the story's kind of discredited through poor reporting. But flares drop from an aircraft. I mean, if the aircraft's flying at 400 miles an hour, those flares are initially going to be flying at 400 miles an hour, and then gradually, very quickly decelerating as they fall.
And if they're dropped in sequence at a specific gap between each one, yes, they would appear in a straight line. But I'm trying to work this out as a total layman to these things. I can't picture them in a V formation.
They would never be in a V formation. They would be in a straight line, like the second set of lights that were seen falling towards the Australia mountains.
Yeah.
So they would be. I mean, if you've seen a military aircraft drop flares, basically it's their first action. Certainly if they think they're being tracked, or if a missile's on its way to them, a heat-seeking missile, they want to put something else in the air that's hot and moving away from them, so that in the hope that as the missile gets nearer, obviously it'll come to the flares first, because the flares are being left behind by the aircraft, and it will go after them. That's the general idea of it. So what they'll do, they'll fire a sudden burst. It just sort of goes pop, 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 and half a dozen flares are launched in very fast succession to generate a bigger heat signature than the plane itself. You see footage of transport aircraft taking off from Afghanistan, from Kandahar Air Base, and you see as they take off, they're just automatically distributing dozens of flares in case there's someone hiding in the bushes with a shoulder launched surface to air missile.
Wow.
Yeah.
Crikey. Gosh, it's a different world. It really, really is.
Because in that instance, obviously, they've got to guard against not a missile that'll be coming from a long way off that they can track and do something about, but something that'll be fired at very, very close range.
Yes. Now, so I think it's perfectly reasonable to discount flight. I mean, they did also, the Air Force, just after the 2007 one, they gave a demonstration and they had a plane go up and release these flares. Well, they ended up in this really messy circle. They were each moving in their own, you know, it was like a Brownian motion more than in formation. It was nothing like, and the lights were a different kind of light as well. I think you said right early on though, these residents, these witnesses, they live closer in it. You know, if they were doing those sorts of exercises, they'd know what they looked like, and it'd be easy to dismiss them. Yeah, I remain unconvinced that it was flares.
Well, yeah, as you say, these people should be used to that kind of thing, and I think there's an awful lot that's been caused by the confusing these two separate events, showing footage of one while describing the other, which led people to say, "Well, no, that's not what I saw. What's going on here? There must be a conspiracy."
Yeah. So the only legitimate explanation that's been given, and interesting, they used the same reason for 2007. They said it's flares again, as exactly the same reason, as that's the only credible reason that's been given. When you've been looking through this and researching this case, have you come up with any other theories yourself?
As regards the V formation, I know that you can get odd effects in the sky, atmospherics, clouds that you can't necessarily see at night. I mean, a good example, I think, of things being weirdly distorted at night. I remember one day coming home, and it was winter time, so it was dark, and as I turned into my street, suddenly there at the end of the street was the moon, much, much closer than I was used to seeing it. It looked huge, and my first thought was, that's it, it's all over, we're going to die. and then I just remembered something that I just happened to hear on the radio that morning about some weird effect of atmospherics. I mean, the moon was actually going to be, it was going to come closer to the Earth than it usually does, but there would be some effect in the atmosphere that would double that effect effectively. And I just remembered that I'd heard that this is what's luckily, so I didn't.
That stopped you from ripping off all your clothes and
running amok with the few hours I had left. Yeah.
Okay,
so yeah, you can get these odd effects. And
a lot of different directions that people are seeing this from. You're looking at different locations. It appears to have travelled. I mean, that doesn't sound like any optical effect I can think of.
Well, the V travelled, but what I'm talking about is the way some people claim they could actually see the shape of a craft, and those lights look like running lights around the edge of the craft, whereas other people said that they just saw lights. But I can imagine some effect of some combination of something in the atmosphere, the heat from the engines, perhaps vapour from the jet engines, could have given the appearance, could have obscured stars as it passed over, and given the effect of a solid object.
There was, I get what you're saying, and I've never entirely bought into the whole "it's a single craft" theory. I mean, there's the witness testimony of Mitch Stanley. No, not Mitch Stanley, sorry. We mentioned Mitch Stanley, who thought they were planes. Bill Greiner, who was a truck driver who saw it, and there's a brilliant quote from him, which we'll come to in a moment. But he saw some of these lights shooting off independently.
Yeah.
He said he'd seen that they'd scrambled jets to follow this thing, and there are other reports about that, or alleged reports about that. It's never been corroborated, but yeah, he claims he saw jets sort of going after this thing, and he saw lights breaking off and almost playing with the planes before shooting directly upwards. So that implies that you're talking about individual crafts within each light. I find that easier to believe than it's a single craft for some reason. I don't know, just in my head. But he did one of the best quotes ever. He said that before this, if anyone had told him they'd seen a UFO, he would have said, "Yeah, and I believe in the Tooth Fairy." And that's the response you get from a lot of people. It's like, "Oh, what a load of nonsense that is," and automatically dismiss it. He says now, though, he's got a whole new view, and in his words, not mine, he may just be a dumb truck driver, but he's seen something that doesn't belong here.
But I think...
And he likened it to seeing, 50,000 people watching a football game, and then the government saying, "No, that never happened."
Yeah.
And I think that's a great analogy. Because it is, in terms of theorising for a moment that the government is aware and covering these things up, 700 people, 700 witnesses. How do you keep something like that quiet?
Well, I mean, didn't Stalin used to do things like that? That he would, there would be some kind of event, and then he would decide he didn't like it, so he would just say, "Well, this never happened," and no one would be allowed to talk about it on pain of death. And eventually, people would start actually believing, "No, it never happened." Just the power of suggestion. But I think it also shows, as creatures, we there is a mystical side to us, but hundreds of years ago, people believed in witches and fairies and werewolves and well, still do in some cases. We've updated that to extraterrestrial beings because they are more plausible to us. But even so, you could just be talking about the same creatures that are travelling through dimensions rather than through space. That they've come out of another dimension, just as a fairy would have done, or a werewolf, or some magical creature. They are the magical creatures of the modern age, of the jet age, the space age. And I think
aliens at the bottom of the garden.
Yeah, and absolutely. And we try and be rational because we live in a scientific age as well. We try to apply reason to things, and not believe in ghosts, not believe in this sort of thing. But I think it's a kind of veneer of rationality that we kind of layer over our instinctive belief to believe these things. I will say, well, no, I don't believe in ghosts. But if I watch a horror film, it will make my hair stand on end because you realise, your disbelief is, if I just knew it was nothing, if I absolutely didn't believe it, it wouldn't have that effect. But I obviously believe it enough. Everyone believes it enough to be thrilled by a horror film. That some supernatural entity is coming after you. For the duration of that film, you can believe it, and maybe for longer. That night, you're frightened to go to the toilet because that is still playing on your mind. So I think there is that there. That if you tried to be a rational, sceptical, a disbeliever, it's all bollocks, that sort of thing. But then suddenly you see something that you can't offer an explanation for, that looks like one of these things you previously dismissed as being a load of bollocks. Yeah, it will, if nothing else, it will make you more aware of more self-aware, more aware that you don't know everything. Here's something that you can't explain.
You're saying, "I don't know everything." How very dare you?
Yes, yeah. Well, I don't mean you personally, obviously, but you know.
Oh, thank you.
In the case of this guy, a truck driver, it would have been a threat to his manhood. You know, he's living in a macho world of American truck drivers. Yeah, of course you don't believe in that sort of stuff, because you'll be laughed at, you'll be bullied. You know, no woman will want you. You know, next thing, yeah. Next thing, they will be they'll be casting it. Well, they'll be doubting your sexual orientation and subjecting you to homophobic bullying. You know, that sort of thing.
Well, that's I mean, not so much the homophobia side, but the concept of people being bullied and ridiculed, because they have come forward and they have said, I have seen something. I don't know what it was. I know what it wasn't. You know, it wasn't man-made, it wasn't earthly, and they've come forward and said this, and met with incredible derision and yeah, absolutely bullying. Well, there was an interesting case connected with the Phoenix Lights about bullying, with Frances Barwood, Barwood, who was a councilwoman at the time in Arizona, and when newspapers were contacting her saying, "Oh, can you comment on this? Have you got anything to say? You know, what's happening? Or the local council, are they investigating it?" And she went into a council meeting and she genuinely asked the question, "So this happened? Are we investigating it?" And she was instantly sort of glared at from around the room. And nobody said anything. Nobody responded to her. It was only afterwards another councilman came up to her and said, "You should not have asked that question at all." And from there, she's subject to a barrage of abuse. There's spoof like cartoons of her, like "Oh, I love UFOs" plastered all over her, being printed in the papers. They got some cards, business cards printed with her name and her details on, and at the bottom that they started handing out to generally to people, and at the bottom it said, "Speak into the tin foil, that's the best way I can hear you."
Yeah,
I mean,
which suggests
just for asking if they were going to do an investigation,
which suggests that she touched a raw nerve somewhere. That
doesn't it though?
Someone wanted to shut her down straight away. It wasn't enough to just say, "Well, no, we're not. We don't think there's enough." They really have to. Let's nip this in the bud and make it clear that this is not to be discussed. I think we've probably all had the experience of when we were probably at junior school, and you've still got these sort of childish, fairy tales in your head and whatever, and you tell a tale. But other children who are maybe a little bit older than you, or a bit more mature than you, and you get absolutely ridiculed because you tell them about the gingerbread man. You know, when your mum opened the oven, the gingerbread man ran away, or whatever, and you get absolute piss ripped out of you. I think we've all had that sort of experience. Or older brothers, who just suddenly decide, "Well, no, I don't believe in this anymore. My dad's told me it's not real, so I'm going to tell you." I'm going to laugh at you for believing in Father Christmas. I think there's an element of that there is that inbuilt fear of telling a tale that seems a bit well. But I think these days, here we are in 2020. I think there's a lot more credulity around. Back in the 1990s, David Icke, for instance, was a figure of fun. He was roundly ridiculed. Now he's got a following. People believe his stuff.
Well, I mean, he had a following back then, of course. But yeah, it was, like you say, roundly ridiculed. And I must admit, I'm one of those people that kind of ridicules his more outlandish theories. But still, I mean, say ridicule, I wouldn't go to the point of bullying or anything like that. I'm a decrier rather than are ridiculous. Definitely. But yeah, absolutely. But it's built into us on a genetic level. It's the caveman in us. There is strength in the community. So therefore, it's really important to be part of that community and to say something that might get us ostracised. No, there is an inherent genetic fear of doing that.
Yeah, we're social animals, so we don't want to step out of line.
Absolutely, because that way, we'll get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have social rules which can be very, very complicated, and there are certain areas you just don't want to get into. Certain things where you just don't know how they'll be received, and you don't want to start talking about these things. I suppose the danger with conspiracies is, and even if you're accepting the existence of UFOs, it suddenly puts you into bed with the kinds of people whose whole life is about conspiracies, and the world is run by an elite cabal. I was very shocked to discover that a former colleague of mine believes all this, that the riots in America are being orchestrated by this elite cabal who want to blame Donald Trump for everything because he's a good president. And that you suddenly find yourself in bed with them, because it's not with them. It's not just a conspiracy, but you're kind of joining our club by believing this conspiracy, and you have to believe it. You can't question it. It becomes a new orthodoxy for that. If you want to join the far right, then you've got to believe in things like the Great Replacement theory and
right.
Yeah. So it's always the danger when you're skirting this kind of thing. If you're being skeptical and you're honestly investigating and looking into what this could be, or certainly if someone offers a rationalisation for something which doesn't hold up, that's very suspicious. That is going to start prompting conspiracy theories.
I think it's important when that does happen, and if someone offers a rationalisation for me, then I'm open to it. I want to listen to it. I want to hear it, because ultimately I like to think I'm a person out there looking for answers.
Yeah.
Now my across the course of my life, my search for answers has only led to more questions so far. But if someone came up to me and said, "We have solved the crop circle riddle. Here's how it's happening. Here's it's and provides the evidence and the proof behind what they're saying," I'm open to that. I know there are some who will only be open to an answer if it's what they want it to be.
Yes.
But I like to think I'm not one of those people. But at the same time, I don't automatically jump onto the first thing that comes up either. The first so-called rational explanation. Because I'm not desperate for everything to be explained. I want it to be.
Yeah, and a rational explanation might not necessarily get everything right, or might not be able to explain all of it. There are some we know that there are unknowns, and I think as a basic premise, most people accept that we are not at the centre of the universe, that the sun, we revolve around the sun and rotate around the sun, and not the other way around. The heavens are actually distant galaxies, millions of light years away. They're not just little fairy lights in the sky, as previously we know that Earth isn't flat. In fact it's a fallacy that even ancient people believed the Earth was flat. They knew from basic geometry that if you stood up on something high, you could see further, and that's because you can see further over the curve by being higher up. They knew that. That's why ships had crow's nests.
Well, Pythagoras was one of the first people to calculate the size of the globe. He did it using rods in the sand and calculation of the arrows and the measurement of the shadows, and working it out from that.
Yeah.
And he was able to work out we go around the sun. It's not the sun going around us. And he was out with some accuracy. It's got to be said. The size of the planet, and that's Pythagoras.
Yes. So, and we know that all those billions of stars out there, all potentially solar systems, with all potentially at least one planet that's similar to ours, that's the right kind of distance, the right kind of temperature, the right kind of composition to support life. I think it's arrogant to assume that we are the most sentient, most advanced beings in the entire universe. So,
well, there are different levels to that, though. There's life, there's intelligent life, there's sentient life, there's life in the form that we understand it, and above all that, there is life that is so technologically advanced they can traverse the vast distances that we're talking about. And yes, the chances of there being other life in the universe it's a statistical certainty that there is other life. But other life can be bacteria.
And in a lot of cases,
other life
it will
can be moss.
a lot of cases, it will be. But it's to assume that we are the most advanced species in the universe, that we are the only species who have managed to get beyond the orbit of our own planet in a craft. That's I think that's quite an assumption to make, and obviously based on nothing.
Absolutely, and when you consider that in the lifespan of the universe, we've been here for a blink of an eye. We are absolutely right at the beginning of our existence. There will be you've got to accept that there'll be civilizations out there that are billions of years old, assuming they've survived that long. It's and where are they technologically? Yes. So, coming back to the Phoenix Lights then. So, the 2008, I think it's fair, unless you really want to disagree and argue the case that no, it was definitely UFOs. I think we can pretty much strike that one as, that was...
That was just one guy with helium balloons and road flares. I don't know how long a road flare burns for, but you see them on TV where there's been an accident in the States and they chuck a flare down the road. They seem to burn for quite a long time.
They do.
Maybe not hours, but
I'm going to suddenly poke a hole on this. They burn hot.
Yeah, they do.
Now,
burn.
I know helium's not flammable, but latex melts really easily.
I assume that it's on a fairly long string from the bottom of the balloon to where the flare is.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't actually be strapped to the side of that. Yeah.
I was picturing the sort of gaffer tape to the side.
I bet she's got a 20-foot line between the helium balloon and the flare. But yeah, they burn hot. That's the whole point.
I'll accept that.
Yeah, I mean the whole point of aircraft flares is they're hot, not that they're light.
Yes. So 2008, 2007. There is so much photographic evidence out there. It's unreal, and it seems to be a duplication of what happened in 1997. Interestingly enough, 7 years before that, in 1990, there was a very, very similar occurrence in Belgium.
Right.
That nobody ever talks about, except we do.
Yes.
Anyway, but yeah, so it's not an isolated event. I think we can rule out flares. Are you leaning towards otherworldly?
You're saying rule out flares?
I'm ruling out flares. Yeah.
Well, there were two things. Certainly the V-shaped thing wasn't flares, but that could have been aircraft flying in formation. But the second part of it could have been, I think, flares being dropped from a fighter aircraft. It said, according to this report, a string of lights appeared in the sky and slowly sank until they disappeared behind the nearby Estrella mountain range. This was later shown to be a string of flares dropped by the Maryland Air National Guard over the North Tack military range.
But they remained in a perfectly straight, well, in a V formation. And as we said, flares don't drop in a V formation.
But this is where the confusion is, because there was the V formation flying overhead, and then there was the string of flares being dropped a couple of hours later. And the way it was reported, they conflated the two and showed one while talking about the other, which led to people saying, well, that's not what I saw, or that's not what it looked like. There must be some conspiracy. So I'm thinking, yeah, some aircraft and then some flares. There was something about the quality of the light as well.
Yes, they've done analysis of it, and the lighting didn't glow. It certainly wasn't aircraft lighting, which is designed to glow and be as visible as possible.
Yeah, running light.
Much sharper. Lasers were ruled out. There was this number of basically any sort of man-made type of light was effectively ruled out in analysis. And certainly flares is one of the flares do glow massively. They're famous for it because they're supposed to.
Yeah.
But okay, so I know what you're talking about there. No, the V formation was seen early on at 7 with 5 lights, but it was also seen later at 10. But by this time it had 9 lights in it, but it was still the V formation. My theory, and I'm going to put this to you, these lights have been travelling for about 3 hours by this point. You're the Air Force, you're panicking, oh, shit, what do we do? Everybody's seeing this, we can't afford this, we've got to come up with something really quick. I know, let's tell everybody it's flares, nobody's going to believe that. Yeah, but if we drop some flares, we can point at that and say that's what it was. And
there's that, yeah. There's that, and then when they're talking about the event that everyone's seen, they show the flares dropping, which of course confuses everyone. So people are saying, "Well, no, that's not what I saw." I mean, one analyst of this has put that down to lazy reporting, that the reporters couldn't even be bothered to get their facts straight.
I think it's more disinformation, and yeah, I can accept that they dropped flares deliberately so they could say, yeah, we dropped some flares.
Yeah, after having said we've got no aircraft flying tonight.
But that would...
and then later they say, well, actually, we need to get one up to drop some flares to explain away. So they've been caught. That
conversation, though, about dropping the flares, that would have happened at a very senior level with a very few amount of people. It would have been basically a secret operation to drop the flares in the first place, and if other parts of the Air Force weren't made aware of it, they're the ones who could have said, well, no, look, I'm looking at the records, there's no aircraft in the area.
Yeah.
And then later they said, oh no, it was flares.
Even the pilot wouldn't necessarily have to be in on it. I mean, that kind of thing could be automatic. If they send a plane up and then track it with a radar beam that doesn't have the right signature in it, that identifies it as friendly radar, the plane will automatically respond. Because pilots are too busy flying the plane or whatever, it will automatically do things like fire the flares.
Right, okay.
There was
like a drone.
Yeah, I mean, planes do a lot of things automatically. There's a pilot there, obviously, to keep a handle on things. There was a story about a couple of cops running a speed trap up in Berwickshire. This is something that went round on email 20 or 30 years ago. And they were there with their radar gun, and they were just a fairly quiet road, and they were playing with it and whatever. And one of the cops suddenly tracked a vehicle approaching at about 2,000 miles per hour, or certainly over 1,000 miles an hour. I thought, well, what's wrong with it? And then the gun just jammed. So they said, oh, it must be sort of dicky, and so they took it back to base and said, oh, there's something wrong with our radar gun. back at the police station. And then a bit later, they were called in by their boss, who said to them, "You're lucky to be alive, because I don't know what you're doing with that radar gun. You were playing with it, but what you did is you shot out a radar beam out over the North Sea, where I think it was a Dutch RAF or a fighter bomber was conducting low-level exercises. The plane detected that it was being tracked by a hostile stroke unknown radar system and automatically armed a sidewinder missile ready to send it straight to the source of the radar. And of course the pilot noticed this happening, so he knew he was only on an exercise, so he switched it off. But that's what planes are. It's a multi-million pound piece of kit. It has certain capabilities to defend itself without the intervention of the pilot.
Okay, well, to wrap this up then, with the Phoenix Lights, my vote is that there was definitely something otherworldly, at least that triggered a reaction from the Air Force. But I definitely think there was something otherworldly. What's your take on that? Your summary?
Not sure it's otherworldly, but something happened. I mean, the Air Force can be a secretive organisation. It's not beyond them to put up planes and then deny it, or carry out operations and then deny them and then try and cover them up, and for news reporters to get the story mixed up. I mean, I think any of us who have ever been involved in anything that's been on the news have thought, well, no, actually that's not quite how it happened.
Indeed. So there you go. The jury remains out on the Phoenix Lights. So that's it from me, Stu Jackson.
And from me, Neil Kelly.
And join us next time when we will be discussing the infamous Bob Lazar. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye bye.
Aliens Explored is a Figo Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Maffucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored, or visit aliensexplored.com.